Thank you for joining us for this community conversation on public safety. I'm WRFA Public Affairs Director Julia Ciesla-Hanley. In 2019, New York State adopted a law ending the assessment of cash bail in most cases involving misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. The law aimed to reduce the risk that someone would be jailed because they could not afford to pay for release and reduce the unnecessary use of incarceration. In response to the death of George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis in 2020, then Governor Andrew Cuomo mandated law enforcement agencies across New York State to submit a final plan by April 2021 for the New York State Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative Initiative. With it now being a year since those plans have been submitted and the ongoing discourse on bail reform laws, we felt it was a good time to check in with our local law enforcement as well as those who have been part of the local police reform strategic implementation efforts. I first would like to thank those of you who are tuned into the program on our airways at 107.9 FM, as well as those watching online. While we don't have an in-person audience at this event, those watching online are invited to submit questions for our panel using the comment section that I will ask you to make brief comments as well, and we do ask you to keep your questions brief. If we have time allowed, we will ask those questions. Also, this program is made possible through funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's American Rescue Plan Act Stabilization Grant Fund. So we will now begin to introduce our panel of guests to you. On my far left, we have Tamu Graham-Reinhardt. She is the chair of the City of Jamestown Police Reform Strategic Implementation Committee. Next over is Tim Jackson, who is the City of Jamestown Police Chief. And to my immediate right, we have Jim Quattrone, who is Chautauqua County Sheriff. So welcome, all of you. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. So, Tamu, we're going to start with you for our first question. Okay. And as I mentioned before, it's been a year now since the police agencies in New York State were ordered to file a police reform and reinvention collaboration plan. So, where are we now, right now, with this plan?
I think it depends on the part of the plan that you're referring to. I think some of the things that we've been able to do have been productive and we've gotten right on, and some of them are a little bit more long-term. So what I will say is that even though it came out of a result of, horrific death of George Floyd, I think what it has done is given us a chance to kind of reconnect with law enforcement and really kind of get an understanding of what it is they do and how we may have a preconceived notion of how law enforcement works from what we've seen on the media or from what we've heard in other places, but I have found it to be just very good conversation to have with the chief and his officers. So we are in different stages. We were able to get a community resource officer almost right away, so Matt Reinhardt's doing an amazing job, and I won't out him yet, I guess. No. So Matt's been great, and we were meeting monthly, but it really didn't seem to work with regard to some of the things that we're hoping to do because some of them are really long-term planning and it requires some partnerships. And so we did the short things first. We got Matt Reinhardt in, and then some of the members of the African American community requested that there was some anti-bias training and cultural competence training. So we gave the chief to go ahead, and he did all of his officers, which is fantastic. So we've started the ball rolling, and I'm feeling pretty good.
Great. Chief Jackson, same question. So where are we now with implementation of this plan? Obviously, is from your perspective, you're doing maybe things differently from what the committee is working on.
Well, we're working with the committee, so a lot of the objectives that came out in the plan, and it was called a reform plan, which I think the sheriff will agree with me. We're not fond of that term because it implies that you're doing something wrong. But regardless, it did allow us an opportunity to communicate with the public and find out what the public and the community really want from their police department. So, like Tamu mentioned, the community resource officer has been a great asset to bridge the gap and make communication easier between the community and the police. Aside from that, recruitment is difficult, although we are going to up our recruitment strategies now that the pandemic is hopefully over in the schools. Last year, we conducted over 370 community service details, which is a lot, and 1,145 beat patrols. Again, that's nothing new. I mean, beat patrols have been around forever, but that's a lot. I mean, that's what the community wanted. From the city surveys also, we learned that the community wanted more narcotics enforcement, so we upped our efforts in that. So it was a learning experience for the police department, and hopefully for the citizens of Jamestown as well. So it was a good, I was glad we went through with it, the plan.
Sheriff, the county had to do its own plan.
Correct.
And so obviously we have two members here from Jamestown, but what is happening with the county's plan or what changes have been brought forward with it?
Sure. As the chief had mentioned, he was happy he did the program or the initiative. It was no secret that I was opposed to the reform that was, in my opinion, forced upon the agencies. However, and the reason I was opposed is I felt much of the things that we were doing or were required to do, we'd been working on. As the chief mentioned, I like to use the word police evolution, because we should be looking at the things we're doing, the operations we're doing, and looking for ways to change and to improve on a regular basis. So that's a term I've been using, is police evolution, but it was a great experience. It was opportunity to meet with different groups. As Tamu had mentioned, the anti-bias training, we've been able to get all of our officers through that, and also been looking at de-escalation training. While we've done that, we are looking at different ways that we can continue in all of our training to implement de-escalation training. But the hiring practices, the frustration is we have a civil service, which is good in one aspect, but it does limit the pool. And many times when we look at the way the civil service is, it limits who we can select from. Mm-hmm. And so statewide, we are trying to get that changed, where we can make it more localized, so we can have a test, and ideally we would have like a pass or fail, and then each county would have certain things that they were looking for, and to give added points to the scores. And we feel that that would be a better way to represent our communities, to get more diversity in our hiring. And it's one of the things that I was able to do recently with Chautauqua Striders and Sally Vasquez and Eli Vasquez, is go to Jamestown High School, and primarily with the Latino population of the school, not the whole school, but a group of students, talk about law enforcement. And that was very rewarding, because we had some of the students come up and realize that they could get into law enforcement. So I think we all benefited from that. Well, I'm hoping the students benefited. I can tell you that the officers on the panel, it was a great experience for each one of us.
Mm-hmm. So. And one thing to note is that for anybody who is interested in reading these plans, they are available on City of Jamestown's website, jamestowny.gov, and on the Sheriff's website. Sheriff, can you remind me what the Sheriff's website is?
Sheriff.us.
Very simple.
And to mention that is the idea with the Department of Criminal Justice Services. They've assured us that they've gone through each one of the over 500 plans. I haven't seen what they've thought of them. We've got no feedback from Department of Criminal Justice Services, and something I think most of the agencies who went through the process would have liked to get some feedback from the Department of Criminal Justice Services. So.
Interesting. So our next question, and Jim, I'm going to start with you. There's been a lot of public discourse, whether it be protests, comments at public meetings on public safety since George Floyd died. And what have you been seeing happening over the last 2 years in terms of police interactions with the public? Now, you've mentioned some just now in terms of schools, but in general, in terms of maybe just general interactions, what has been the community's response to law enforcement?
I think overall in Chautauqua County, I think the city as well as throughout the county, there's great support for law enforcement. I think we need to listen to our community members. Our community members need to be willing to share with us and have some civil discourse. And I think that's critical. I'm going to throw Tamu's father under the bus, because for those of you who know Ron, he is point blank. We've had some really great conversations, and one of the things that sticks, I'm not sure if I'm going to say it exactly the way Ron said it, but while we may disagree on different things, if there's a problem in our community, we want to be able to come together and come up with a solution. And I just really valued that, our coffee break to meet. But I think we need more of that, whether it's individuals or groups. I know the chief has also done coffee with a cop, and not to stereotype us, but we do like our coffee, and it's a great opportunity to get community input. And our goal at the sheriff's office is go out in the different communities. Before the program started, we talked about how what is needed in Ripley might be different than what's needed in Jamestown. Or I shouldn't say might, it is different versus Hanover or any of the townships. So it's important for us to get out into the community, to listen to our public, to see what their needs are, but also what their wants are. And so we are going to continue to do that and continue to listen to what the public says. We're encouraging our officers. We have a link on our intranet site where, as the officers meet with community members, they can share with the administration what they're hearing.
Interesting. And to put it out there, I also love my coffee, and I don't know if that's a stereotype as well, but I know that I stay out of jail because of it. So going to Tim, Chief Jackson, what are you seeing in terms of, we're both at the same city council meeting, so you're seeing a lot of public comment on public safety. What are your officers and what are you yourself hearing out in the community?
We're hearing and seeing a lot of support. We really are. I think once we opened up and made it easier for people to communicate with the police department, it just increased our support, and we are seeing a lot of support. Like this week is Police Week, the start of Police Week, and we've seen a lot of support from the community all around. So at first there was, I think once we started to listen more to the community, that was one of my goals as chief. It just helped. So we've seen a lot of support.
Tamu, obviously you're not in the police department or sheriff's department, but from your perspective, what is your sense for the interactions between law enforcement and general public here?
I think it's gotten to be pretty good. Chief Jackson's done a great job with his police force, and I also kind of look at his police force as some rather young, much younger people, and so I also look at his force as kind of like that transition between those of us who are Gen X and and they just come from a very different place. They grew up in a very different way of life, and so I think to some degree some of the stuff that has been happening has been a little confusing to them, maybe because it just wasn't the way they were raised, and so. I see his officers at events. They're at schools. The dog is in the schools. The retired officers that we've been able to hire at Jamestown, they have a relationship with. So, I would say it's getting better, and we're really working hard to continue to really get our young people, as a result of your meeting, Sheriff Quattrone. I got the names of the kids, so I have a list of names, but I didn't want that to kind of just nothing happened. The kids got excited about it, and so what now what? And so I'm trying to figure out how to, I've had just initial kind of what do you guys do meeting with law enforcement, fire, and EMS, because those are all areas that are local that we have a significant shortage in, and how do we begin to have some of our students begin to see themselves in these careers? And so it just is the tip of the iceberg, but I'm hopeful that we'll start to see that more. I'm hopeful that we'll start to see that more.
Mm-hmm. And even though I think we all know, if you can remind listeners, you work for Jamestown Public Schools.
I do, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what's your title there with them?
I am the coordinator in the student multi-tiered student support services department, but I really focus on equity and diversity and inclusion issues. And so the lens through which I work for me is, are all of our kids getting what they need to be successful, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, or anything like that? Are we doing the right things in the classroom? Are we doing the right things with discipline? Are we giving them the right connections in the community and giving them a kind of a purpose for being? I think COVID has taken our kids and just kind of given them this kind of what's the point kind of attitude, because they were closed up for so many years. And so it's now getting them kind of trying to get them connected with things and say, you know, I can do this, or there's a purpose here. And so that's kind of some of the things that we're working with. And some of those things are, you know, of course, we want students to go on to be successful, live successful lives after graduation. Not everybody goes to college, but we need lots of different things here. You know, we have job openings all over. And so for kids who not sure they want to go to college right away or might want to go later, there's all kinds of things we should be connecting them to through partnerships and internships and just relationships with people in the community. So I'm kind of trying to work that angle as well.
Good information. Starting with Police Chief Jim Jackson here, you and I talked a little bit beforehand, but what would you say some of the most pressing issues for public safety are right now?
The pressing issues right now, at least in Jamestown, are narcotics, and it's been that way for years. That continues to be an issue. More gun incidents, that's an issue as well. Mental health, including overdoses, is an issue. And like I said earlier, recruitment for new officers is, believe it or not, an issue. So those continue to be issues in Jamestown, especially the narcotics.
Tamu, we'll go back to you. Same question. What are you seeing as the pressing issues here in Jamestown?
I would have to agree with the chief. The narcotics / mental health piece, because we're seeing a lot of students that are struggling with mental health issues in the schools. You know, we're seeing a lot more students with pretty severe behaviors and social emotional learning, and so that that's connected to, you know, maybe what family life was like, and that spills over into a lot of different places. So I think also we're seeing behaviors, more consistent behaviors, or let's say more consistent. We're seeing more I don't want to say egregious, but the types of behaviors that we're seeing that we used to see in a small segment of the population of students, we're seeing larger segments of that. And I think it's a reflection of just how the pandemic really kind of pushed people to their limit. And so we're seeing some of the mental health that the chief is talking about as well in our kids and as well as with the families. And I was talking to the chief several times when I was on council, and that mental health piece, really, we need more, you know, that's not a law enforcement thing, but that's what they get called to do. They're not certified counselors, they're not social workers, they're not, you know, they are called to respond to an incident. And I think the public or people might get frustrated with the limits to what an officer can do. They can only go up so far and then they have to hand it off. And oftentimes, you know, that handoff doesn't happen, or they've done their part and whatever's supposed to be there isn't there. So you're kind of seeing the same thing over and over again, because that's their role. They have served their purpose. They've done what they were called to do, and it needs to go somewhere else. And I think that's a really big missing piece in supporting law enforcement, is what's that somewhere else, and where's it going to come from, and how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, and we've seen in other communities where police are called to a mental health situation where someone from mental health would have been a better responder, you know, in terms of trying to understand what is happening. But I can go on, maybe to explore on that a little bit, but I don't want to skip the sheriff here. And in terms of public safety in the whole county, what are you seeing as these pressing issues?
I think what we're seeing in the county is the same as we're seeing in the city.
Yeah.
Spread out further because of the population, but we are seeing that intersection of drugs in mental health. And so often those who are incarcerated, we see a co-occurring, you know, both mental health and substance use disorder. And so the people that are coming to the jail, often because of bail reform and different issues, and they're not in jail to get the treatment. Unfortunately, many of these individuals, the treatment they get is in the jail. And when they're out, they're not connecting to get the treatment. So now they're not coming to jail as often, but when they come, they're sicker. But in the community, when we see the narcotics issues, the mental health issues, the violence, you know, that's where we are trying to work together. Chief and I, Chief Ortolano from Dunkirk, Chief Price, and really all the chiefs in the county are trying to work together. And we're hoping to build on a partnership with the FBI And I don't mean to take part of your presentation away, but this is something we have realized if we're going to combat these, the drug problem. And honestly, I think when we look at drugs, we look at the gun violence with guns is, and I keep on throwing in there human trafficking. I think we see a lot of that. And maybe we don't see it because people choose not to look for it. But when we start to look at that, we want to not just focus on narcotics, but look at the big picture and that intersection of the narcotics, the gun violence, the trafficking, other crimes that are occurring with it, to try to combat that. And by working together, we can share information back and forth. We have the resources from the FBI, the DEA to work with us. So when we're doing investigations, we do have more resources here in Chautauqua County, here in the city of Jamestown, city of Dunkirk.
I know the County Department of Mental Hygiene has very early started this mobile crisis unit for mental health. I mean, have you been able to see any use of that, at least in Jamestown or in or countywide? Or?
So I didn't want to jump ahead because I do know one of your next questions is anything positive to report?
Well, why don't we start with you then, Sheriff? Because we've talked about, what are problems, but, there's a sense that, there have been positive things happening. So,
Sure.
I mean, I probably jumped the gun on you a little bit.
No, that's
here.
fine.
Yeah,
so I think there's a lot of positive things happening in this county. And we took a negative that happened, with the George Floyd. And while there was some contentious times at the beginning, I think we have taken that negative and been able to turn it into positives. In one of those areas, when we started hearing different issues, we hear the term defund the police. I think there's different meanings to that, but one, I believe that the big part of that is to collaborate better with the providers, the mental health providers that can offer the assistance to those who are in emotional crisis. So for many years, Chautauqua County has had a partnership with Chautauqua Opportunities as a mobile crisis team that works in the evening hours, from 5 in the evening, I believe, until 8 or 9 in the morning, and then on weekends that we can call them out. Recently, within the last year, I believe, the county mental hygiene department has started their mobile crisis that is operating during the daytime. And I think ultimately with the goal of having teams in the north end of the county and the south end of the county and being able to operate 24 hours. However, right now, staffing has been an issue, is with anything. So we continue to work with that. We've seen some positive relationships built out of that. It's not perfect, and that's because, while we feel that there's a lot of calls, to have a team stationed and be in the right location at the right time, sometimes we don't have enough time to be there. The thing I'm most excited about, we had our, this year, last month, we had a crisis intervention team training with members of the Jamestown Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, Dunkirk Police Department, the state police officer was there, and I think one other department. But this is a effort to train law enforcement officers how to better respond to calls that somebody's in emotional crisis. But it's got to be a team effort, and it's not just law enforcement, but we need the mental health providers. So our goal there is to divert from not only taking them to jail. We don't want to do that because jail isn't the place for somebody who's in emotional crisis. But the emergency room is not always the best place either. So if we can divert and get the proper services without taking them to one of those two places, that's a win. The big win is we look at less injuries to those who are in emotional crisis, less injuries to the officers, and really a community, when we look at the family members of those who are struggling with mental health issues or emotional crisis, it's a benefit to the families as well. So.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't been aware that kind of training had been taking place, and so that's really interesting to hear about because...
Yeah, and our goal is to have that training once a year to train more officers, and that's part of it. We were able to get a state Senate grant to pay for this first class, so they paid for the instructors and backfill for the officers. And so next year we'd like to have another one anywhere between 20 and 24 officers in that from all the agencies. And we will have at least yearly training, updated training to keep the officers fresh. And ideally, we'll get those officers responding to these calls along with, they may be the first ones to go because mobile crisis isn't always the best to go to a violent call. But, then the mobile crisis, we're going to be working with our dispatchers to train them how to triage the calls to better know who to dispatch. Do we dispatch law enforcement? Do we dispatch a mobile crisis team? So.
Chief Jackson, what are
I
the
think the
positives?
sheriff took my response.
Oh, no.
He pretty much covered it.
No, I would say, because I am familiar with some positive things that are happening at the city level, but if you can expand.
Sure.
Yeah.
Number one, like the sheriff mentioned, the mobile crisis, we have been using them a lot more, and they've been very helpful when they do respond. Also, our collaboration with local, state, and federal law enforcement. I had a press conference on Monday about our renewed efforts to curb the violence in Jamestown, and we're going to start a partnership on that. Another positive is it's Police Week, where we honor the officers that are here, and unfortunately some that died in the line of duty. But there's a lot of positive going on in the community. Again, I've said it earlier, people love the interaction when we go to community service events, the schools, and just walking the beat, bike patrol. So that's been a very, very good positive, and we'll be doing more of that this summer too.
People really seem to be liking the police department's Facebook page, I've noticed.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a little
Sure.
bit? Yeah.
We have a community resource officer Officer Reinhardt. He is excellent at it. That's and he's just great at it. I don't know what to say. That's his niche. That's what he's good at. And we all play a part on the social media, but he does run the page, and he's excellent at it. He puts out information. It could be about a road closing, not just law enforcement, but anything. So it's good to have that interaction with the community. He's been a great tool.
I just want to jump in because Officer Reinhardt does do a great job. And if the chief wasn't going to mention, I was going to bring that up again. I don't mind letting them know because in our annual goals and objectives for the sheriff's office, I mentioned Officer Reinhardt. And while I did not have a community resource officer in my reform plan, it's something that we want to move towards. And it's a little bit more difficult in the broad area that we have to cover, but the goal is to have a community resource officer who can help coordinate and hopefully get more officers involved throughout the different zones in the county. So we are hoping this summer to partner with a local ice cream truck to be able to, because I like my ice cream, better than donuts. But I want to be able to get into different communities to reach kids and adults alike, and just to be able to combine that with giving resources, information, and working with Prevention Works and having a combination. We were able to receive a grant to do some of that work within the county over the next 3 years.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard about the ice cream truck, and that's interesting to hear that you'll be doing a collaboration with them, too. Yes. So, Tamu, I have not forgotten you.
Oh, that's okay.
So from your perspective, what would you say are the positive things that you could report on?
I guess I go back to what the sheriff said about the presentation he did at the high school and the fact that 45 kids showed up just to ask questions, just because they were interested, or maybe just to get out of math, who knows. But it was encouraging to see that there are still young people who are interested in the career, and as well as young people of color who maybe never saw themselves working in that line of work. And so it gave me hope, it gave me some encouragement, and that's what kind of got me going down the road of what other things can we begin to look at within our community to partner to try to give our students some exposure to other types of careers. So I've seen that as a really great positive, but I do have to say that I have seen an improvement in community relations. I've seen, people seem to be, I know we have this, people are talking about rising crime, but I don't get the sense that it's really the fault of law enforcement or people are taking anything out on law enforcement. I think they recognize the extent to which they're, able to do what they're able to do given the resources they have. So I'm feeling kind of positive about the way things are going to go in the future, especially if we're able to hire extra officers and just really kind of galvanize the community maybe a little more cohesively with the partnerships that they're talking about, with the partnerships that the district is talking about, and community members who just live here and want this to be a safe place. And so I'm encouraged by the collaboration that I'm starting to see with law enforcement and agencies and schools, because it really is a community and we all live here. So that's, for me, it's kind of not any one thing, but just kind of a movement toward maybe something better in the area, hopefully, that we can just continue the momentum.
Good. So the next question is kind of I wanted to say a data-heavy question, but we've heard a lot of information about crime, concern about crime being on the rise, and what's happening statewide, and we've had reports to City Council about numbers from last year and things like that. But I was kind of curious to say, what is the data showing right now? Obviously, we hear a lot of things in the news, including on our station. But start with Chief Jackson. What is the data showing you right now with crime in Jamestown?
Last year, the crime in Jamestown actually decreased 5%. So we were, unlike many communities that showed an increase, across the board, our crime rate decreased about 5%. So that's obviously another positive thing I should have mentioned. But yeah, it's decreased. So we are different from other communities. However, the gun-related incidents are increasing.
Mm-hmm. I think you mentioned on Monday, it was either you or Mayor Sundquist, I think it mentioned, just the number of gun incidents so far this year. I think there's been, I'm trying to think of how many gun incidents compared to even last year, the total number last year, and it was thinking.
I think we're at 27 that
incidents.
We've confiscated.
Oh,
27 firearms.
Firearms confiscated. Yeah. I think was it something like 90-something last year total. Mm-hmm. So now we're through the first quarter of the year, and you're on target to, if it continues the same, where you're looking at possibly confiscating over 100 guns this year.
Right.
Yeah. So that is a definite, in contrast to overall crime, that there's certain types of crime that we're seeing increases in. Mm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last year, we were fortunate that we were able to increase our engagement with the community and lower the crime rate at the same time. Mm. So I was very pleased with that outcome.
Yeah, I would imagine probably goes hand in hand, definitely.
It should.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, Sheriff, what are you seeing at the county level? I have to admit, I haven't seen a report in a while. That's part of the problem of only being in the job for just over a year. But what are the stats for the county right now?
So I actually was looking up the stats statewide for New York State from the Department of Criminal Justice Services. While they don't have the 2021 data, so we saw an increase from over the last 5 years, so up through 2020. As the chief mentioned, the unofficial data for 2021 for the county, we're seeing a decrease. Statewide, we've seen a decrease, but it's interesting, and as the chief mentioned, he's seen community involvement, community engagement, and then the crime going down. So while I'm not a expert on the statistics, it seems like there's likely a correlation there. And I think when we can see that community relations, that community interaction, in getting our community to buy in and not allowing the crime to happen in the communities. Mm-hmm. When I say that, meaning reporting it, and when they feel more comfortable talking to law enforcement, we're going to get more crimes reported, more suspicious situations reported, and hopefully we can be able to prevent that. But we had been seeing an increase in crime up through 2020, and now we're seeing, again, decreases. And we haven't seen as much gun issues out in the county as we're seeing in the city. And I shouldn't say because the city is part of the county, so that's why, this last year, we were able to partner with the city police during their give details and have a deputy riding along with an officer. And that's been a good collaboration because our officers have an opportunity to, learn who some of the players are, if you will, some of the individuals. We had a burglary that happened out in just outside of the city of Jamestown in Ellicott, where the person who was burglarizing the building, our deputy who arrived on the scene was able to know the guy by name because somebody he'd met during the give detail. And so I think those are positive interactions. And hopefully we're going to continue to see crime rates decrease, and with the enhanced collaborations between local, county, state, and the federal agencies, that we're going to see, hopefully be able to see a reduction in the number of guns, illegal guns, that are coming in to the county and to the different areas.
You mentioned it a couple times, give detail. Can you explain what that is?
I'm going to turn that over to the chief because
okay.
I have an idea, but he understands the.
It stands for Gun Initiated Violence Elimination.
Okay.
And basically over the summer, we pair up, it's a state grant, it's called a GIVE grant. And we pair up with a sheriff's deputy and we target certain areas of high crime. And it's meant for guns, obviously, and narcotics, and of course, any other type of violence, but that's what it's meant for. That's what it's for. So, yeah, it's been a great collaboration with the sheriff's office.
Yeah, and I do recall seeing where the city had to accept grant funding for that, and so
Yes.
that does give a better explanation of what that program does. Wow.
Yeah.
Tamu, in terms of crime data, and I guess obviously you're with the Jamestown School District, you're with the Reform and Reinvention Committee, but do you have anything that maybe you've seen or know of in data-wise in terms of crime stats here, or?
I really, would defer to the officers on that. So it's encouraging to hear, that even though we've been hearing a lot in the news lately about gun violence and adding officers, that we are making some inroads. And, maybe the silver lining out of what happened to that poor man is that we're recognizing that we need to be more connected as a community, right? And that we need to be more collaborative and look out for each other and be more engaged with the agencies and the community and the population. And so I think as going forward, I'm hopeful that the numbers go down, continue to go down. But as far as the data, I don't know too much about the data, and so I'm glad to hear it's getting better.
Yeah. So this will be one of our last questions before we open up the conversation to audience questions. So Tamu, we'll start with you.
Okay.
So, and because this is a natural one, when it comes to community involvement, what can the average citizen do to get involved with making communities more safe?
For me, it's I've just kind of been watching the last couple of years as our society has changed. So when we moved into our house, the street was just full of families and little kids, and it just wasn't an issue. And I think we've become, and I think COVID just made it worse, we've become more introverted and more isolated from each other, even if we live across the street from each other. And so, as I think the sheriff was saying, as communities start to engage with each other and with law enforcement, you kind of get them to start seeing that, not on my street, this is not going to happen, because people would be kind of like taking back their neighborhood, right? You're not going to do this here. Take that someplace else. And so I think with the work that law enforcement is doing and trying to be out there, I think we'll start to see that more. And just as we're coming out of this pandemic, I think people will be out more anyway. So I believe that's going to be helpful, but again, I really think that the social media piece has given people a lot more opportunity to engage with law enforcement. I know there were, the one or two times I've had to call the police department, I'm like, is this an emergency? Is it a non-emergency? Who do I call? What do I say? But you can just kind of put something up there, and they're usually quick to respond. So you felt like you've been validated, and I think as far as the community, in general, I think it's important that they recognize that it's not an easy job. Law enforcement is not an easy job. And we while they are professionals and they have training and a lot of things, there's a lot of stress in the job. And to be mindful of, sometimes there are stressful situations that officers have to deal with, and we have to kind of recognize that how to interact with that when it becomes a stressful situation so it doesn't escalate. So I think it's also incumbent upon the community when they interact with law enforcement to recognize that this could escalate or this could de-escalate, kind of like what the sheriff was saying. So it's really understanding and really sitting down. I mean, I think that one of the things Officer Reinhardt offered to do and some of the sheriff's officers did was they really answered a lot of the students' questions, and I wasn't there, but I'm sure that there were some tough ones based on what they'd seen on social media or what they'd heard, and really being able to be transparent and say, in my shoes, there are days when I'm just distressed and just as scared as you might be. So it's really opening up those conversations and really understanding how we can best engage with each other in a way that's going to be productive.
Interesting, great, yeah. Chief Jackson, same thing. How can a general citizen, average citizen, get involved with helping make communities more safe?
Well, the community is the eyes and ears of a police department. That's what I like to refer to them as. We can't do our job without cooperation from citizens. It's just not going to be effective. We need people to call us when they have information about something, to be cooperative, or where they see something that's just not the norm in their neighborhood or their community. Because if anyone knows a community, well, it's the citizen that lives there. They know it better than anyone. So we need people to report things that look different, might be suspicious, and to keep us informed of what's going on, and don't hesitate to call. We have to work with them.
Mm-hmm. And you have even an anonymous tips line,
Yes.
too, as well.
Yeah, and plus our social media pages, we do receive a lot of information from that, and that's great. That's a newer avenue that we're using, and it's been very effective. Mm-hmm. People report a lot on social media because social media is very popular, and we're going to use it.
Can you remind us of the phone number for the tips line? Because it was mentioned on Monday, and I only know that the last 4 digits are tips.
Tips,
Is it
yeah.
is it 483?
No, it's 483.
483 tips.
Yeah.
So if you look, I think it
716.
Yes.
716, of course.
Sorry.
Yes. So Sheriff Quattrone, when it comes, countywide, what can an average citizen do to help keep their community safe, or in terms of also working with the sheriff's department?
I think both what Tamu and the chief said is, community engagement, meaning, through the COVID, we kept on hearing about social distancing. And I another term I disliked,
Mm-hmm.
I would rather it be called spatial distancing, mm-hmm. because we're social beings, and mm-hmm. I think we needed to have that socialization going on, to prevent some of the mental health issues. So while I could be 6 feet apart, that doesn't mean I can't socialize and I can't
Mm-hmm.
talk. I think the neighborhood I live in now, I live on the north side of the city. And a great example is last year, just after Christmas, there was 2 young men walking around the neighborhood knocking on doors asking where the sheriff lived. And one of the neighbors didn't know him real well. Because I recently moved into that neighborhood, he contacted the sheriff's office, and Jamestown Police showed up. But those young men were already on my porch talking. They had a legitimate question for me, and so it was a great interaction with them. But also to have the police show up. But my takeaway from that is the neighborhood was watching out for each other. And as Tamu had mentioned, is I think society has left. When I moved in, not to this neighborhood, but the neighborhood before, I had a neighbor come over and introduce himself and say, it's probably the last time you're going to see me because we don't socialize around here. So, and that's the sad part. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood that, you know, whether you want to call it nosy neighbors, but that's what we need. We want nosy neighbors. We want neighbors who are going to be paying attention to what's going on. And, you know, to say hi, but if they recognize that something's going on around a house or around somebody else's residence, to contact us. And that goes no matter where you live. If your closest neighbor is a mile away, there's somebody driving by at different times, and report that. But again, that interaction between law enforcement and the community is important, and breaking down some of those barriers. I'm not sure if it was this question or another, but Tamu had mentioned the transparency. We need to be transparent with the public, and we'd like them to be transparent with us. As the chief had mentioned, when you witness something, be willing to talk with law enforcement, and that is how we're going to solve crimes. Is the eyes and ears that are out there on a daily basis. And they know what's normal in a neighborhood. We're us driving through a neighborhood, we may not always see something that's out of place. So.
Yeah, and thinking, it's like this conversation reminds, is there still a neighborhood watch program in Jamestown?
We've tried to revitalize it, and we're still working on that, but we're finding that people are more apt to use an app, like the Ring app. There's an app that we have that we put out on our social media page where you can, and it's a free app, to the Ring app, and we put out information over that and vice versa, and we get, again, they've provided us video footage of somebody stealing from a porch or whatever.
Oh,
And-
so this is the Ring doorbell.
Yeah.
Where is,
Yes, but there's a Ring Neighbors app.
oh, okay.
So we found that's been pretty effective. Yeah.
Interesting.
I know on the north side, we have a north side neighborhood messenger page. So when things are happening, we're letting each other know what's going on in the neighborhood. Some of the things that are suspicious, as well as just some of the positive things that are going on. And I think that's a beneficial tool for those who have access. Obviously, it's not going to work for everybody, but yeah, we need to start being creative. And whether, you know, neighborhood watches programs are great, but they so often seem like they start off really well and then people lose interest. And
Yes.
so.
It's hard to organize things sometimes and keep them going. So,
Yes.
yeah. We do have a couple questions from the audience, and one is very specific to JPD. And the question was, I've seen a lot of progress for the JPD made with local hires. How many officers are now Jamestown residents? Do you happen to know this question? Answer question?
The exact number, I can only say there's several more. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
So how many officers are total in the police department right now?
Right now, we are at 61.
61. Would you, no, I guess it would be hard to say, yeah. So we don't, that might be something, if you're able to, maybe look
Sure.
it up and email me after the fact, for those who are listening, that we might be able to at least include that information when we put this, rebroadcast this, I should say. We will put it online, so.
I will add that we started our hiring off the resident list. It's a list where they're all city residents. And many of our recent hires, well, all of them except for 2 were off that city list.
Right.
But I would have to do a tally with all the officers to give you the exact number.
All right.
But that's not a problem.
And then, since that was such JPD, I'm not going to ask the Tamu or the sheriff that question, so.
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
Well, the second question, I'll read this out loud. It says, I am so glad we have such a great network initiated on the local level. However, what can we do about the targeted violence from criminals who live outside of our community and have narcotic vendettas or gang activity? That is very scary and detrimental to the growth of our small town. So yeah, something that was mentioned on Monday. Is that
Right, that's exactly what we're doing. We're collaborating with our local, federal, all our partners in law enforcement, Dunkirk Chief, I mean, everybody. And because of that affiliation with out of town, the FBI is going to be very valuable, as every department's going to be valuable, but they will help us link everything together. So that is what we're doing. We're collaborating, and that's why, I mean, we had a meeting yesterday, as a matter of fact, all of us.
So in the collaboration we're talking about with the FBI is they have an initiative called Safe Streets. And so their main hub is out of Buffalo. They have a division of that, or arm of that, that's in Niagara County, one that's in Monroe County, and then our goal is to have one here in Chautauqua County, primarily the Jamestown, Dunkirk areas, but throughout the county. And as the question indicated, is they're seeing the officers or those people on the task force in the Erie County right now recognizing that, you know, individuals from the Buffalo area, Rochester, are coming to Jamestown. And if we can start working together, being able to share those names and share that information back and forth, that's how we're going to hopefully be able to start to limit and, you know, I'd like to say eliminate the problem, but I think we're going to have to work and continue to work hard to do that.
Mm-hmm. And something that Chief Jackson, you brought up before on Monday's press conference is that with working with the FBI, that it changes some of how arrests are done, or necessarily, or with charges when you bring in federal charges. And, you know, since we were talking a little bit about bail reform, how does that change that whole situation?
Well, if they're prosecuted federally, and obviously that's not every time, that's, you know, that's somebody else's decision to make, but if someone is prosecuted federally, bail reform doesn't apply because it's under federal laws. And typically, it carries a lot more weight. It has a lot more teeth to it when someone is prosecuted federally. So we're hoping to use that as a deterrent as well to stop this.
So, and I actually do have a third question that was submitted. So I thank you to listeners who are, and people reviewing who are submitting questions. And reading through here, in many communities, culturally, citizens will not, quote unquote, snitch, especially when it's related to drug or gang alliances. How do we break up these allegiances that rely on criminal activity for income, stature, and protection? You know, it is a subsection of a general community. Big city crimes are too intense for a small town. So we mentioned a tips line before, and I don't know who wants to take this first, but so what do you do when you have a situation when people don't want to tattle or call in information?
Well, I think part of the question is also how to dismantle
Yes.
an organization. And that's simply one by one. I mean, the FBI talked about with our meeting about how you start taking out key players, and then more people are more willing to talk when they're, you know, if you're looking at a hierarchy of crime, a crime pyramid, if you start taking out real high important players in that pyramid, I think the lower level people are more willing to come forward.
And I think, again, part of this initiative is to have some community engagement and really working with our communities, advising them what we're doing, letting them know we are working hard, getting rid of this criminal element, and hopefully getting them the punishment that they need. But I believe that the communities need to realize that, to feel comfortable, to know that something's going to actually happen. If right away the individuals are right back into the same house that we may have just served warrants on, because, you know, so many of these individuals, due to bail reform, are coming right back. And so there's a fear of reporting it when they realize that the people are going to come right back. And that's where we're trying to use some of the federal legislation to have some more teeth in their charges, so the individuals aren't coming back right away. That community engagement, I think, is going to be important to let the different cultures and to connect with them and to say, hey, we feel what's going on, we understand what's going on, now let's try to come up with a resolution.
Tamu, I mean, you're former city council member, and, so obviously you work with the community, and you get a sense for, what citizens in Jamestown are feeling about. Do you get the sense that people are afraid to, turn on activity, people in their neighborhoods that they're seeing commit illegal activity, and do you have any sense for maybe how we can work to break up some of these allegiances?
I think that there are certain communities who have that's just kind of been the way they've been for, a long time. So I haven't experienced it personally myself, but I do recognize the challenge of getting people who just, we're not going to talk, we don't say anything, we don't snitch, and it's been ingrained for a long time. So building that trust is going to be key. I don't know where exactly those communities are, but we certainly do have them, because I think from what the sheriff has said, what's going to happen if this person doesn't remain in jail, or the charges are dropped, or are they going to hurt one of my loved ones if I say anything? And so there is a level of intimidation that those bad players do give to a community, and it takes some strong people to kind of stand up to the bullies, and when you've been kind of conditioned not to say anything, it becomes a little bit harder to do. So it's definitely going to be a work in progress for a while, because of just what it's always been. This is what we just do. So it's going to take some really intentional work, and hopefully with maybe some of the federal legislation that they've been talking about, we can assure people that, when we take this person away, or when you call this in, this is what's going to happen. And until, I think that's probably like the last, there go my glasses. It's probably like the last, I would say, one of the last pieces of law enforcement where there might be some mistrust is, it's not necessarily law enforcement, really, it's our, kind of like maybe our judicial system and how things are weighed with regard to misdemeanor or felony, and is it, a state charge, federal charge, or whatever. So when people don't understand or don't really have a good grasp of when a person gets arrested, what happens next and why what happens next, and they just believe that nothing's being done. So it's I think it's also an education, yes, to be honest with you, of what that means when law enforcement is called and the person is taken into handcuffs, and what they're being charged with. And until we can get people to understand what happens when they make this phone call or they call this tip in, there's going to be a kind of a level of, I'm not quite so sure this is going to be worth it for me to do, because I don't know what's going to happen.
So, and actually, maybe because people don't know, I mean, Tim, what happens when someone calls in a tip? Is there a general practice for how anonymous tips are handled?
Depending on the tip, but there's always follow-up. And like Tamu mentioned, people don't know what happens after that tip, but I can tell you it's always followed up on, always.
Mm-hmm. Is it, and for someone to say, well, if I call in and I give them this information, so an officer will get back with them at that point, at some point, or?
Depending on the situation, a lot of our tips are anonymous, so they won't,
right.
But every tip is followed up on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where that community engagement, take that and make it into a community education as well. But like so many things, I know the city had a meeting over Washington School last week or 2 weeks ago, and not a lot of people showed up. And
right.
So, we need the community to get involved. When there's meetings like that, when there's meetings, engagement meetings with the community, the best way to solve a problem is to get input from everybody. So the more people that can show up, the better it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, is the police memorial ceremony open to the public next week?
Yes, at Tracy Plaza.
So yeah, if you want to tell listeners the details of that event happening.
Noon on Friday the 20th. There will be a ceremony there open to the public right outside on Tracy Plaza, assuming the weather's cooperative.
All right. Well, we'll cross our fingers for that. So I have no other questions from, which it was glad to have some questions, but I want to thank you, all three of you again, for coming and participating on this panel. And also thank you to our audience. You will be able to view this presentation online for free on our Facebook, YouTube channel, and it will air on WRFA-LP.com again, and it'll be on our airwaves as well again next week, Thursday at 5 p.m. On behalf of WRFA, the Rachel Lene Center for the Arts team, and Cranky Play Productions, thank you for being with us tonight.